Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this class number 88. It's going to have two names because this is going to be we're going from book to book, but we're going by degrees. So in other words, there'll be overlapping. And so we're going to do some more on the purpose of physical reality tonight. And then we'll get into the Arc of Ascent as we need to. But it's a very long book, Arc of Ascent is, and it's probably going to be worth at least 2, maybe 3 meetings. Please understand that I'm not going to try to cover the entire book. I'm just going to give you a basic outline of what the book is about, mainly to, first of all, obviously, to help you decide if you would like to read it or not. I go in more depth into the subject. But secondly, because, as I said, the books we're going to cover at first are a continuum. They are a continuous discussion beginning, what's the purpose of physical reality for the individual? And then when we get into Arc of Ascent, what is the purpose of society, and how is social involvement essential to personal ascent? So let me share my screen, and we will start with, hold on, let me change this view here. So I renamed this, instead of the Arc of Ascent, which I said would be the name of the class on the invitation, to The Purpose of Physical Reality, Part 2. Now, this is the book, The Arc of Ascent. And before we go into continuing or finishing up our discussion of the purpose of physical reality, and we'll kind of, for those of you who weren't here last time, sort of cover very briefly what we did last time to pick up where we left off. But the Arc of Ascent, even as the purpose of physical reality, as I say, focuses on the individual's spiritual development. The Arc of Ascent is concerned more with the progress of the soul as it relates to society, and ultimately how society will, in this era or dispensation, culminate in the unity of the planet as a whole. Now, this is by no means the end of human development, as Baha'u'llah makes clear, but it is a milestone that has never been achieved before, nor will it ever need to be achieved again. In other words, once you have unified the planet, it's not going to become disunified. It may go through trials and tribulations of all sorts, no doubt, but the governance and the society itself will be a planetary governance. So if we go to this is obviously a circle, and I'm going to share with you for a second the whiteboard. And I'm going to give you an idea very, very briefly of what the Arc of Ascent means. So if we draw, for example, we'll go with a red color here. The Arc of Ascent means this, that whether it's referring to the descent of the manifestation into the world of being, so the low part of this arc is the physical world. So the manifestation emanates from the world of the spirit, where he pre-exists, and descends into the earth. And then you have, why don't we change colors for that? We'll do blue here. And then you have the ascent of the dispensation of humankind under the guidance of that manifestation. And the same thing is true with the individual. If you're talking about the individual emanates from the realm of the spirit, the individual soul does, associates with the body, and at that point is just beginning to learn. So this is the arc of descent. And then as we begin to learn and acquire virtues, then we ascend to this realm of the spirit. Now, this doesn't mean that we do it again. In other words, once you've done that, you don't repeat that. In fact, this is part of a discussion that Abdu'l-Baha uses to prove that there's no such thing as reincarnation. So if you want to look at it over time, or dispensation of, if you say Judaism to Christianity to Islam to the Baha'i faith to the Baha'i faith, it would be something like more like a spiral like this, where it's not just repeating itself, but it's ascending over time this way, going upward. So you have the descent of the prophet, and also in other words, it's a useful metaphor, because you can say the manifestation appears and you have the beginning of ascent, but then once the religion breaks down and you have the need for a new revelation, and then you have the descent of a new prophet and another ascent. So you can, it's a useful metaphor for the individual, for progressive revelation, and so forth. So let me get out of the sharing of the whiteboard and go back to the class for tonight. And here, let me focus on this. Now, so that's what that represents, the complete circle. So we're going to go back and sort of rehash, particularly for those who weren't here. And I see that dear friend I just made yesterday, Walt, is here with us tonight, who's learning about the faith, has read a lot, and so welcome, Walt. The purpose of physical reality, if you recall, then we dealt with four main subjects altogether. The concept of theodicy, which means how do we explain the justice of God? What is the logic behind God, who is both omniscient and omnipotent, allowing bad things happen to good people, whether individually, or as we've seen with the various shootings, the earthquake in Syria and Turkey, or the war in Ukraine. Why does a God who is omnipotent and obviously has the power to intervene not do so? Well, of course, on the one hand, the response is God does intervene. He sends a manifestation, a prophet, and we persecute them, and in many cases, such as the crucifixion of Christ, we kill them, or the execution of the Bab, the same thing. And not only kill them, but they are executed by the very divines, or the clerics, who are the leaders of the previous revelation. So a double irony there. And so God's mercy and forgiveness far exceeds his justice, because justice is giving what is deserved, whereas mercy, of course, is giving beyond that. And so the concept of theodicy from a Baha'i point of view is that God is just and acts appropriately, but he wants us to acquire virtues on our own. So he gives us and this is the main subject of the purpose of physical reality, he gives us a physical classroom to start our life's journey in, so that we can use it as a workshop to acquire virtues, and more importantly, as we said last time, to acquire the tools for our further progress when our body dissociates or our soul dissociates from the body. So the four subjects in that book are the concept of God's justice, the purpose of physical reality, which is as a classroom, as Walt and I were discussing yesterday, it's probably the best analogy is to compare it, even as Baha'u'llah does, to our beginning our lives in the realm of the womb. And so we begin life in the womb when the soul associates with the body at conception or during the process of conception. And then we're born again into this life, and then we're born again into the next life. So if you will, we have sort of three births. So the metaphorical nature of physical reality, which is really the focal point of this book, simply says that everything in physical reality has a purpose, something we can learn from it if we study it, whether it's a rock, whether it's a plant, an animal, or other human beings. And so, and we finished, of course, the final discussion in that book is what is the relationship between how we perform in this life and what we will experience in the life to come. And the main emphasis, the main point of emphasis we had, and that I discuss in this book, is that there is a relationship, but it is not a stasis. It is not a static relationship. And that is, we aren't relegated to some particular station based on what we did in this life. No doubt, as we discussed last time, we will feel the effects if we've done well, and the effects if we've done poorly. We will learn by reviewing what we experienced in this life and how we responded. And from that lesson, we will then go on with free will again, a degree of free will. Now, this free will is a very important subject in the Baha'i teachings, because obviously we're not totally free. We're not, we don't all have equal opportunity. We're born into different circumstances in different places. Some die early, some children die at birth, and they are taken care of, the writings say, and so on. So this concept of the afterlife we discussed at length, and that's where we really left off. And in the Q&A afterwards, we discussed in depth some of the experiences as they're described in what are called NDEs, which are near-death experiences. And indeed, one of our participants described her own experience of having had an NDE and having basically been told in that experience that it wasn't her time yet, and she recovered from her experience of dying while in an operating room. So Theodicy, the concept of Theodicy, the kingdom of names, which has to do, the kingdom of names means the kingdom of specific representations of spiritual forms. So you can say, what does a rock represent? Well, a rock represents unity, it represents determination, if you want to get very poetic, and so on. An important point here that we discovered, salvation as motion. And what that means is this: there is no point from the Baha'i point of view where you attain salvation, whether in this life or the next. We're always in motion. Now, that can be misunderstood to mean, gee, we work so hard and we never get anywhere. No, that's not what it means. Or we're striving and striving like Sisyphus pushing the rock up the mountain and we never get it there. No, to be in motion is joyful in and of itself. It simply means, or at least I mean by this discussion in the book, that even in the next world, we may have a certain understanding based on what we achieved through study and through testing in this life, but we go on to understand more and more and more. There is no stasis, whether in this life or the next. We're always moving forward, or else we are regressing. But in the next world, as one of our participants pointed out last time, we have no regression in the next life, but stasis in the next life is equivalent to regression. That is, if you're not moving forward, it's the same thing as regression. So autonomy and will, this is one that we're striving for. This is one of the main reasons that the afterlife is concealed from us. Baha'u'llah talks about that if we understood what was ahead, we wouldn't be able to contain ourselves from striving to transition into the next life. And so our purpose is to attain, with our free will, education, and this is done with social help, whether you're talking about the family or the community, with the twin pillars of reward and punishment, which Baha'u'llah says are the twin pillars of justice. This doesn't mean that the only way you're going to get ahead is to be punished, though there is great emphasis, and I've got some quotes later on to share with you about that, on testing, that testing, whether physically or mentally, emotionally, in whatever way. These are the ways that we progress. And if you remember last time, I compared it to physical training, that you're not going to improve your physical endurance or your development of your muscles and so forth unless you stress them. And so the stressing of our souls and of our intelligence, the fact that we need freely to choose to go forward is one of the main components of how we advance. And then the seventh part of our discussion was the why God wants us to think. In other words, we said, if we're spiritual when we're born, if our essence is our soul associating temporarily with the body, then why doesn't God simply put us there in the first place instead of creating this sort of indirect method or indirect methodology? And if you'll also recall, this was something that meant a great deal to me when I was studying the methodology of the manifestations to see how I could be a better professor. And I realized that the indirection was much more effective than simply repeating to my students what I had learned and filling their heads full of facts and full of theories that I had gained, that the most important thing I could give them were tools for their own freely chosen path of development. And so the physical experience is not necessary in the sense that those who aren't given a chance to experience it, whether, as I say, that they die as infants or so forth, that it's clear in the writings that God will provide a means for those who don't have the opportunity, who are deprived of it through no fault of their own for many times, to develop fully in this life. There's no set amount you have to gain in this life. There's, again, no point of salvation. There's no certain amount of information you have to get. The point is, what you're given, you need to exercise. So if you're given 50 years, then you do the best you can with that. 60 years, whatever. You get my point. Detachment, we mentioned very importantly, is the idea of becoming detached from yourself. That is, seeing yourself as important apart from the totality of human society, that we're all part of. On the one hand, this book is talking about individual development, but individual development, as we'll see in the Arc of Ascent, is impossible without a social interaction. And to give a simple example, you can think that you're very just. Well, how do you know unless you have an interaction with other people in which you demonstrate that justice and develop that justice? All right, so it's through these physical exercises that we develop these virtues. And then finally, fear of death, the eternal consequences. Why do we fear death? And as we said last time, we fear it because we haven't been there before, nor do, except for the NDEs, which I find, frankly, very comforting. And no doubt some of them are reliable and more reliable than others and so on. But as I think I mentioned in the Q&A last time, while neurologists aren't big advocates of it because they believe for the most part that the personhood derives from the brain, oncologists, I find, the ones I have talked to, believe very much that these NDEs are valid experiences of the afterlife. And the reason that I have found that to be the case is that they are experiencing on a daily basis patients who are approaching death by degrees. And so many of them approach very gradually, minute by minute, day by day, and have all kinds of encounters with, in some cases, the sense of presence of near ones who've passed on before them, and so on. Well, so what is theodicy? How is it resolved? It is resolved because ultimately, individually, we are never without hope and never without forgiveness and never without the ability to reconcile, to strive, whether in this life or the next. How is theodicy resolved collectively? Because this is a prefatory experience. This isn't the rest of your life. And so if you are killed in an earthquake or from a shooter in a university or all these horrific things that we see occurring in our midst, then you are transitioned to the next life and you begin where you left off there. But it doesn't hurt you. No doubt it is painful to those who are your dear ones and are left behind. But that tests them and gets them to ask, so what is life about? And so on. Why are the good allowed to suffer? Why does God not intervene in history? And of course, the answer is he does intervene in history. In fact, one of the first classes we had on this course talked about how without the intervention of the manifestations, there would be no human progress. There would be no human society. How is the Baha'i view distinct from all others insofar as theodicy is concerned? Because we believe that there is not just a plan for this dispensation, but the whole of the planet. And not only that, but beyond this planet. So we believe, in other words, that however refined this planetary society becomes that Baha'u'llah has given this guidance to bring about, it can always be further refined. So we never get to a point where it's a finished product. We'll get to a point where it's a finished product insofar as having a global government or a global commonwealth, but it never get to a point where we can't improve anymore. So that's one way it's distinct. And of course, it's also distinct because, I would say, because we believe in progressive revelation, but so does Islam. And so does Christianity, but specifically Islam. The whole of the Quran is dedicated to the unity of God and God's prophets. But one passage from the Quran, as we've said before, is taken to infer that there will be no further revelations. And we've dealt with that passage before, and we can deal with it again in the Q&A for those of you who are not familiar with it. So what is God's purpose for humankind individually? Free will, autonomy with assistance, forward motion, which equals salvation. There is no, as we just said, no end point in this process. There's no point where you cease to need any further development because you become perfect. No, there's always room for further development. This is the ultimate expression of God's justice. So that's the metaphorical nature of physical reality, that everything in creation has a spiritual function, and the ultimate expression of human purpose is human ascent, individually and collectively. And this physical experience we have is the indirect methodology with which God teaches us. Why? Because if we were suddenly plopped down in the next world, forget about my original premise that why aren't we just already born into that world? Well, we really are. It's just veiled from us. So, I mean, the fact that we emanate from the realm of the spirit means we are essentially spiritual already. We're just living an illusion that we are physical. So why is that indirection important? There are a number of reasons. One of them, of course, is that when we go to the next world, we appreciate that the true reality is perfect as spiritual. And the other thing is that it gives us, as I said over and over, the tools with which we can develop further. If we just were plopped down there, we wouldn't know there was any other way of being. As I've said in some of my talks before, it wouldn't take you more than a couple of hours in a cell to realize that a prison is not a pleasant place to be. And it doesn't take for those who've had an NDE more than a few seconds in the next world to realize that's where they would like to be and where they feel comforted and where they don't want to return. So we acquire knowledge and tools for gaining further knowledge. And with it, we exercise these tools on a daily basis and become changed. We come to understand the systematic nature of creation as a whole. So the relationship between this life and the next, and this is where we left off last time, why we fear death when the writings say we should not. What is the process by which we go to the next world? Do we all have the same experience? Is there any free will in the next life? Can those who have died in sin become changed? Is there an integration of both worlds into one system, or are they two separate realities? Well, the answer to these are as follows. Here is Baha'u'llah saying, O Son of the Supreme, I have made death a messenger of joy to thee. Wherefore dost thou grieve? I made the light to shed on thee its splendor. Why dost thou veil thyself therefrom? So he's saying death is a joyful thing, not something you should worry about. Why are you afraid? Well, as I said, we're afraid because, you know, once our faith is strong enough, and faith I don't here mean blind faith. Once we have investigated enough and we have as much certitude about the logical nature and of the reality as Baha'u'llah has described it, we have what he calls certitude, and that's what the Kitab-i-Gan, the book of certitude, is supposed to inculcate in you, and that is a confirmation, a confirming experience, so that you believe in these theories as much as you believe in Euclidean geometry, okay? That they're just as provable and demonstrable and just as comforting. I guess if you think the Pythagorean theorem is comforting, depends on what you're doing with it. And so how do we transition to the next world? We mentioned this last time, that every one of us, as we transition, Baha'u'llah says, bring thyself to account each day ere thou art summoned to a reckoning for death unheralded. shall come upon thee, and thou shalt be called to give account for thy deeds. And of course, that the key word here is unheralded, because it means it might be tonight, it might be tomorrow, and you better be in good shape, or at least, in other words, it's not something you can put off preparing for. Do we all have the same experience? This is from Baha'u'llah and Gleanings. The soul is the first among all created things to declare the excellence of its creator, the first to recognize his glory, to cleave to his truth, and to bow down in adoration before him. If it be faithful to God, it will reflect his light and will eventually return unto him. If it fail, however, in its allegiance to its creator, it will become a victim to self and passion, and will in the end sink in their depths. Now, again, even here, it's important to balance out. You don't want to take passages out of context. And so this is in the context of other passages that say, yes, this might happen, but this doesn't mean you won't have a chance to improve even if you die in that condition. So again, there's no fixed state that you attain when you die. You are still a soul in process, a work in process. So do we have the same experience? Well, no, obviously not. The first part is a joyful experience. The second part is a frightening experience. Now, what I'm going to read to you now is extremely important. And this is something we did not deal with last time. Can those who have died in sin become changed? And this, again, is axiomatic from the Baha'i writings, and it says, yes, you can. And this passage is particularly important because if you take it out of context, it sounds like you can't, that you have no free will. Let me read it to you, and you'll see what I mean. This passage says there are four ways, no, three. Let's see, the blue, the green, and the whatever that is. The progress of man's spirit in the divine world after the severance of its connection with the body of dust is through here's number one, the bounty and grace of God alone, of the Lord alone. All right, well, that's nothing you can do. Either you have the grace and bounty of God or you don't. Or through the intercession and sincere prayers of other human souls. So we pray for those who passed on. No doubt, even in the next world, we pray for each other. But for those, that's why we say prayers for the departed. It actually helps their soul progress in the next world. Or through the charities and important good works which are performed in its name. So you can figure out what variety of things that might be. It could, something dedicated to the works you've done, and so forth. Now, the deceiving part of this is it sounds like you have no part to play in it. But the fact is, the bounty and grace of the Lord alone is the sole means by which individually and collectively we progress. Otherwise, God would not keep sending his manifestations in spite of the fact that we reject them and even slay them, imprison them. Baha'u'llah was imprisoned in shackles, left scars on his neck. The chains did, and he was bastinadoed. The last 40 years of his life was imprisoned. It is now, this is the passage that offsets what many people infer from here, that, oh my goodness, the only way my daughter who has passed on is going to progress is through works done in their name and prayer. So I'm going to spend all my time praying, and I'm going to do charitable works and so on. And learning doesn't mean you shouldn't, but the point is, it is even possible that the condition of those who have died in sin and unbelief may become changed. That is to say, they may become the object of pardon through the bounty of God, which repeats the first part of that last quote, not through his justice, for bounty is giving without desert, and justice is giving what is deserved. As we have power to pray for these souls here, so likewise we shall possess the same power in the other world, which is the kingdom of God. Are not all the people in that world the creatures of God? Therefore, in that world, they can also make progress. But this same quote goes on to say, and here's the important part, as here they can receive light by their supplications. Well, you can't very well supplicate God unless you have free will to do so. If you're simply programmed to do it, that's no benefit for you, or it doesn't demonstrate anything that you yourself have done. So even as you do here, you can plead for assistance. There they can plead for forgiveness and receive light through entreaties and supplications. Thus, as souls in this world, through the help of the supplications, the entreaties, and the prayers of the holy ones can acquire development, so is it the same after death. Through their own prayers and supplications, they can also progress, more especially when they are the object of the intercession of the holy manifestations. So you see, you've got to, in other words, on the one hand, you can say, well, you don't have free will, you don't really need it in the next world because everything's made plain to you. So you don't have to say, is this the right path or is something else? Is this a good thing to do or not? Everything is unveiled. Reality is clear. So in one sense, you're not challenged to figure out what is good and what is bad. At the same time, you still use your free will to pray and to do whatever actions that are still veiled from us. Baha'u'llah says, again, this is through wisdom that we do not reveal to you the exact nature of the next world, so that you can focus on your job right now. So that's very important. So another question, are the two worlds organics, one organic system? That should be one, with two expressions. And this is a passage that makes it very clear that it's really, reality is one whole entity with two aspects or two kinds of expressions. The spiritual world is like unto the phenomenal world. They are the exact counterpart of each other. Whatever objects appear in this world of existence are the outer pictures of the world of heaven. So that's another statement of the metaphorical nature of physical reality. What you see in this world are names, that is, particular objects that represent some spiritual principle. So the purpose of testing, why are we tested? Why must we be tested? And in the fact, there's so much in the writings about suffering and testing. And it says that we will not be tested. And again, I go back to the analogy of physical education or physical exercise. And this is from the Quran. This is from Surah 29, verse 2. Do men think that they will be left alone on saying, we believe, and that they will not be tested? And he goes on to explain that testing is only through testing that you will be prompted to develop. You need the testing. And this is a quote from the writings of Abdu'l-Baha, one of many, many, many that he writes about the value of testing. He's answering a letter to someone. Thou didst write of afflictive tests that have assailed thee. To the loyal soul, a test is but God's grace and favor. For the valiant doth joyously press forward to furious battle on the field of anguish, when the coward, whimpering with fright, will tremble and shake. So too the proficient student, who hath with great competence mastered his subjects and committed them to memory, will happily exhibit his skills before his examiners on the day of his test. So too will solid gold wondrously gleam and shine out in the sayer's fire. That's a reminiscent of a hidden word of Baha'u'llah. He says, with fire we test the gold, with gold we test our servants. It is clear then that tests and trials are for sanctified souls, but God's bounty and grace. while to the weak they are a calamity unexpected and sudden. So testing is one means by which we can teach other, are taught and learn. This is another very interesting passage of, I feel. We talk about the different aspects of character. You know, if you have had children and raised children, or even a pet, and say you have two pets and they're both the same kind of pet, maybe from the same litter. Even when they're just going around with their eyes shut, you can see they all have different personalities. Well, the same thing is true with individuals. And here, Abdu'l-Baha says something that I think is remarkably important. The personality of the rational soul is from its beginning. It is not due to the instrumentality of the body, but the state and personality of the rational soul may be strengthened in this world. It will make progress and will attain to the degrees of perfection, or it will remain in the lowest abyss of ignorance, veiled and deprived from beholding the signs of God. Now, what's exciting to me about this, it means that no two people, no two grains of sand, the writings say, are the same. But no two people are alike, that your uniqueness is there from the very beginning of your soul. So you are specialized in some way, and it is your job, among other jobs, to find out what skills has God bestowed upon you so that you can figure out how you can utilize those skills to advance yourself, which necessarily involves assisting others. In the treasuries, and this is from Baha'u'llah, the Epistle to the Son of Wolf. This is a passage that interested me for a long time because we don't know the answer. And when Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of faith, was asked, what is this mysterious knowledge? He said, we don't know. Baha'u'llah never told us. So it's something that I think is interesting to read so we can guess what might be the answer. And an answer I like to think about is perhaps a knowledge of the afterlife, which some of these NDE accounts bestow upon us. In the treasuries of the knowledge of God, there lieth concealed a knowledge which, when applied, will largely, though not wholly, eliminate fear. This knowledge, however, should be taught from childhood, as it will greatly aid in its elimination. Whatever decreaseth fear, increaseth courage. Should the will of God assist us, there would flow out from the pen of the divine expounder a lengthy exposition of that which hath been mentioned, and there would be revealed in the field of arts and sciences what would renew the world and the nations. A word hath likewise been written down and recorded by the pen of the Most High in the Crimson Book, which is capable of fully disclosing that force which is hid in men, nay, of redoubling its potency. So maybe it's not that knowledge, it's a force within us. Maybe the force is faith or certitude. Certainly certitude would be in it. Well, I don't know the answer, but isn't it exciting to know that there is such a thing? Oh, would that the world could believe me, were all things that lie enshrined in the heart of Baha. Now, this is about timeliness. And this is a passage that's extremely important because we wonder, well, why didn't the manifestations tell us about world unity and world government back in the days of Moses or of Christ and so on? And he said that, listen, if you once you read this quote, you understand a great deal of perhaps even this past passage, why it's concealed to it. Doesn't mean it will always be concealed from us. Oh, would that the world could believe me, were all the things that lie enshrined within the heart of Baha, and which the Lord his God, the Lord of all names, hath taught him, to be unveiled to mankind, every man on earth would be dumbfounded. How great the multitude of truths. He's saying now, though, even though you would be dumbfounded, here's the reason I can't unveil it all to you. I have to do it little at a time. How great the multitude of truths, which the garment of words can never contain. How vast the number of such verities as no expression can adequately describe, whose significance can never be unfolded, and to which not even the remotest allusions can be made. How manifold are the truths which must remain unuttered until the appointed time is come, even as it hath been said, not everything that a man knoweth can be disclosed, nor can everything that he can disclose be regarded as timely, nor every timely utterance be considered as suited to the capacity of those who hear it. So this means, of course, that even when you're teaching people about the Baha'i faith, you've got to know what their capacity is as much as you can so that you don't bombard them with more than they can take. But of course, the most important part of it is there are many things that we do not yet know that will become revealed to us individually and collectively when we are ready. Then a passage that simply iterates what I've already said, that what about those who die before they have time to acquire virtues or become aware of this world? These infants are under the shadow of the favor of God, and as they have not committed any sin and are not soiled with the impurities of the world of nature, they are the centers of the manifestation of bounty, and the eye of compassion will be turned upon them. Meaning, of course, that their soul will go and progress, and you think, well, how are they going to do that without having experienced this life? And no doubt Baha'u'llah or God has a means of fixing that, of enabling them to understand in another way. So if you have the opportunity, you utilize it. If you don't, God will provide. So the Arc of Ascent then is what we will begin next time. And I have provided in this series of slides the outline of the table of contents, the art of human ascent, the linkage between the two worlds, the social imperative and the emergence of global identity, a wheel within a wheel, the Baha'i paradigm of human history, and of course that's referring to progressive revelation. New wine in old skins, this is referring to progressive revelation and why each new revelation must needs have a new administrative order, a new structure to contain it. Adam and Eve get divorced. That sounds silly, and it's meant to, but it's dealing with the twin aspects of the spirit and the body, and Christian antinomianism, which you probably are not familiar with that term, but it's talking about the letters of Paul, which say that nothing you can do will affect your spiritual advancement. No laws. It means against the idea of law, that no laws will help you, or following the laws. You have to just have blind faith. And it split Christianity in two, and we will talk about that divorce, that schism, the modern heritage of it. The choice wine at the family reunion, unsealing the choice wine. These are images that are in the Baha'i writings. Baha'u'llah calls the Kitab-i-Igan. He says there are two most important books are the Igan and the Agdas. The Agdas, the most important. The Igan is the choice wine, and unsealing the choice wine is how Baha'u'llah begins the Kitab-i-Agdas. He says, with the fingers of power and might, we have unsealed the choice wine. And what does unsealing the wine mean? It means, of course, that the knowledge is applied to your everyday regimen and to society. From the lesser peace to a golden age, this talks about the various stages in the evolving of human society. We've talked about this before. We're going to talk about it again. And the model of the Baha'i Commonwealth. We've talked about this before, but we'll talk about it again too. And then the heart of the Commonwealth, which is what I call a tribal ethos, and that is the emphasis right now in the Baha'i faith is to establish what I call a tribal ethos. In other words, the local community is, as I've said before, the God particle of a planetary society. And I won't bother to explain what I mean by that right now. So there's the House of Justice, the seat of the House of Justice on Mount Carmel. Lovely building, lovely building. If you ever get a chance to go, you will be awed. Made entirely of Carrara marble, brought from Italy.